Howdy. I want to thank Mr. Arnett for starting off his brief on Disaster City. Now you should have a good idea of what is in Disaster City, some of the props, and the facilities that we could use there. A couple of years ago, when I started working with Disaster City, we decided to design a unique radiation detection exercise for students so they could get some experience using instruments in the field and in some obscure areas in and around the facility, and in places that you can't find anywhere else. And this Disaster City, as you saw before, is a very unique place. I wanted to give the students an idea of how difficult it is to use field instruments in the field and crawl around structures and use these things in areas that they're not used to. So over the next couple of minutes, I'm going to talk about this exercise. So the purpose of this whole exercise, again, was to give students this idea of the difficulty of using field detection equipment in areas that you just never even thought of. In most cases, students have never used search vehicles or radiation isotopic identifiers to show them where radiation is and to identify them. So the first purpose of this experiment is to give the students this unique experience. The second is to give them an idea of safety in the field. It's too often that we as scientists go into a laboratory, we think about safety in the laboratory, but it is not really, we don't think of it as a life-threatening situation. So in some of the situations I put the students through are really kind of scary to some people. I'm going to put you in tunnels. I'm going to put you on top of structures that are hard to climb. And it is kind of fun when you're thinking about it, especially if you're carrying around a $12,000 to $15,000 piece of equipment. Sometimes you're not thinking about your safety. Sometimes you're thinking about the safety of the equipment that you're using. And also, I want to talk about giving the students a challenge of working outside the laboratory environment. We don't do that often enough, and I think this is a unique experience that does that. So the scenario that I've given the students is that there's been an earthquake in this area, and there are several collapsed structures. We know that there is a source in one of the buildings, but we don't know which building. So the first thing that we have to get these students to do is locate the source. You can do it in several ways. One of them could be walking around with meters, or you could use aerial detection equipment, or you can use a vehicle system. In our scenario, the roads are fine, which probably would not occur in the real world, but we've given the students a vehicle system, and then once the vehicle system localizes where the radiation is, they use handheld devices to map the radiation. So the types of detection that we're going to use are first a vehicle-based system. This is a system built by Ortec. In standard configuration, it uses both a gamma detector and a neutron detector to detect the radiation around them. In our scenario, we're just using about a liter sodium iodide crystal to locate the source where it's at. The nice thing about the Ortec system, as you can see from the slide, is that it has GPS and mapping capabilities, so you can see where you're at. You could actually follow yourself on roadways, and you could go back after the event and figure out exactly where the source is. In our case, though, we're trying to use the map and the detection equipment to localize the source real time. Next, once we figure out where the source is at, in the location, we need to isolate the source. To isolate the source, we will use handheld equipment. In this case, we're using survey equipment where we can map radiation fields so we can tell the first responders that are going to respond to this event where the dangerous levels of radiation are. Finally, we are going to use what is called a RID, or a radiation isotope identifier, to locate where exactly the sources are and then to identify the sources. Once the sources are identified, the students are allowed to take the sources out of the area where the sources are located and show them to me to show that they've executed the exercise properly. So what we're going to do first is we're going to drive in a van. I like Scooby-Doo. That's why I have the Scooby-Doo van driving around. And he is going to try to figure out where the source is. So once we've actually driven the vehicle around, we know the source is in this rubble pile. Now, you must consider one thing. For first responders, you have to figure out where dangerous levels are. The best way to do that is actually use survey equipment and follow specific contours around. Now, in the United States, we have set dose limits for emergency responses with radiation. One, for life-saving, we go to 250 millisieverts per event. So to protect the life, you want to be able to take a dose. And that dose is actually well below where you will see effects due to acute radiation sickness. And it is also at a level that you would not expect to see an increased risk for cancers later on. There's a similar limit for the protection of property, which is 100 millisieverts. And similar levels, I believe, exist in Japan as well. Now, in reality, the isodose curves are going to be based on safety. And now the safety in this case is I'm not going to be able to get you to levels where you're going to have to be concerned about what the dose rates are and how you are going to be affected health-wise. So what I just choose is I'm using a very high level cesium-137 source that's going to create fields that go out from the source and the rubble pile. In this case, I have the isodose curve set for the students at 200 microar per hour, 100 microar per hour, 50 microar per hour, and 25 microar per hour. I apologize for using English units, but that's what I have here in the United States. Realize, though, that the background for Disaster City is somewhere around 10 microar per hour. So I wanted the lowest level contour to be about twice background. And the slide is there to show you kind of how students can map out where the curves are. Notice also that the curves are not just these beautiful half circles, but they are bumpy. They're a little bit all over. Realize that survey equipment bounces around all over the place. And sometimes you take a limit or a dose that you read at that moment, even though the statistical variation might be large or what you consider large. So sometimes you just got to pick that dose and just write it down. Also, what the curves are meant to indicate is that the structure that you are trying to scan might be shielding the radiation. So you might not get these nice, beautiful curves, but because you are getting some shielding and attenuation from the pile itself. Now, I've created a radiation field for the students. And I then tell them, well, you know what? We know now that there's sources inside the pile, and you have to go get them. And in reality, obviously, you would never do that. And since this is my world, I'm going to do it. So what I tell the students is, we know that there are sources in the pile. The first responders are scared to go in the pile to rescue the people that are in there. So your mission now is to go into the tunnels to try to figure out where the sources are within the tunnels themselves. Now, this is a couple of things that you have to realize. In a real-world event, well, first in a real-world event, you wouldn't be going. But in this event, you don't know the situation in the tunnels. You don't know the dose rates. I will give you a monitor so you can monitor what your dose rates are, but something might change and it might be dangerous for you to be in there. So what we're trying to do to simulate now is working in teams. So I want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to go in the tunnels. So I separate the teams into 2 or 3 people. One, there's not a lot of room. That's the only amount of room that I could give you. So I'm going to send you in there, and I'm going to say, hey, I don't know the radiation levels in there. So I only want you to stay in there for maybe 1 minute or 2 minutes. And at this point, I'm outside one of the tunnels, and I'm telling you what the times are. I'm counting it off. At the end of 1 minute, I tell the students that are in the tunnel to return as rapidly as possible, but to stay safe. Then I also tell them that to avoid tunnels where there are elevated levels of radiation. At this point, I've actually moved a large source into the tunnels, and I can control your movements as you move through the tunnels. But I've set the dose rate limits in this case to 50 microar per hour. They have an alarming dosimeter, and if they get into a level that high, it will alarm, and they know not to go that way. Also, they're using flashlights, and one person should be watching what the dose rates actually are. Next, I want them to map the tunnels. So they have to realize that as they go into the tunnel, about how far did they go? About what are the radiation readings every 5 to 10 feet? How will that affect your mission? Where do you want the next group to go? So when those people come out of the tunnel, what they do is they start mapping out on a piece of paper how far they went, what the dose rates were, where the highest dose rates were, where should the next people go. That is called a positive handoff. And remember, I'm really trying to focus here on the safety of the situation. This is an unknown. So as a safety officer in a real world event, I'm telling the students, when I say it's time to come out, come out. And what you give to the next team could save their lives. So I want you at this point to take it very seriously. Once they mapped out where the tunnels are, they're going to find a room that actually has a set of sources. They are then going to use the RIDS to identify the sources. So that's it. That's the scenario. It's a lot of fun. It's a unique experience. And we've done it for the American Nuclear Society, Tokyo Institute of Technology, and a tour group that comes in from India every so often to give them this unique experience. I hope to see you here in Disaster City too.